All righty. With all that said, we're gonna get started. And let's just jump right into the question. So you're kind of launching the whole like, what is an SOP? How to even begin it. Let's really go super remedial and think that no one here knows what an SOP is. Can you describe it to us? How it helps, how it works, and what we're supposed to do with it?
Absolutely. So SOPs, the long-winded version of it is standard operating procedures, but SOPs is definitely the easier way to say it and go for it. SOPs really just come down to the written guidelines for your organization, and those guidelines are going to be more so for your internal staff so that they know what to do, how to do it, so that there's consistency in everything from how things are made to how things are sold to how things are handled if things go wrong. So really it should be seen as that, not necessarily detailed directions, but detailed guidelines. And where you divide the difference there is, your detailed directions are going to be that every minute detail. If this goes wrong, do this. If this goes wrong, where the guidelines are going to say, if I want to get from point A to point B, this is how I should do it. If there's issues, then that's a separate SOP. That's a separate, well, think of it this way. If I need to drive from here to the supermarket, I'm just going to give the directions from here to the supermarket. I'm not going to include what happens if I get a flat tire. I'm not going to include what happens if my engine breaks down. That's going to be separate steps. So you got to think of it that way. Your SOPs are how to get from point A to point B in every little avenue of what you're doing in your business.
Right. And with preparing your SOPs, we know that there are multiple SOPs that are actually required by some municipal cities and also with the state. What are some of the major SOPs that folks will have to put down, especially on the retail side?
So there are a set of 10 different SOPs that are required by CRC alone. And those focus on how you're going to handle the major issues, like I mentioned before, recalls, adverse events. They're going to talk about process and procedures for security. That's going to be a big thing, especially among the towns. They all have different requirements for security. In Ewing, we aren't required to have armed. However, in Newark, they are required armed guards. There's other towns that don't require security guards at all. So it really is going to focus down to aligning both what is required in the town that you're in, along with what the CRC, because the CRC doesn't require a security guard on premise. They require cameras. But anything beyond that camera scope comes down to where you're at. So it is kind of paying attention to all compliance layers. And I think I mentioned in my course too, it's not just the compliance layers of government, but also of your own insurance companies. Your compliance to your own warranties. That's something I didn't mention in the course was aligning your SOPs with what does the warranty say? If something breaks down and you want to get it repaired under warranty, are you following the guidelines that they do for monthly? You have to do this. I mean, even in the dispensary, we have to follow along with, we have bollards, and if they break and we didn't bother to monthly put them up and down and clean them, we don't get that covered. So little things like that come along. But really kind of looking at like I said, big things being security, your vault procedures, your cameras, that's going to be a big thing. Yes, where things go wrong as far as adverse events, but also even just things in manufacturing. That's not really going to be a part of dispensing, but the manufacturing guidelines really break down what is necessary, who's in charge. They even list out in there. And that's not usually normal in a compliance of saying what specific leadership role has to oversee that SOP. But in the CRC, they do. They label in manufacturing that you have to have an actual compliance manager who is in charge of all of that. So just things to consider about it. It might actually name some personnel that you weren't considering, or maybe you named them differently. Then you have to address that in your SOP.
It seems like your SOP can kind of like really teach you about your business, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
actually how to get it to work. Can you talk to me a little bit about SOPs for compliance versus SOPs for operational efficiency? Are
Mm-hmm.
they one and the same, really? I know you talked a little bit about work, both where one seems more like work direction, but one is kind of like just to satisfy compliance.
Correct. When you're the ones for compliance, you have to think from the perspective of who's going to be inspecting you,
Yeah.
and what the CRC is going to look for. They're not going to care about does this person use this in Dutchy or whatever your software systems are, but they are going to care that you're following what they put in the law. They're going to look at, are you keeping records for the certain amount of time that you're supposed to, that 4-year time frame? Are you making sure that you are checking IDs before they come into a dispensary? They're going to look at anything that comes back to the law. So they're not actually looking about the details of how you get there, just that you know what's needed to get there. In the how to get there, that's going to matter to your people. And there may be some overlap in a compliance SOP to your operational SOPs. Obviously, you want your staff to get from point A to point B, and that is compliantly, but they're not going to care about the keystrokes or necessarily the timing, even in cultivation, how long you have to water something, or they're going to be looking that you know that you have to grow properly and what pesticides you can and can't use, but not how much. That matters to your staff. So it's just kind of dividing on, yes, the compliance ones, do they relate to the law? We obviously want that to be a part of the operational ones, but you don't necessarily need the operational to be a part of your compliance ones, if that makes sense. They want a more condensed version, right? The compliance, your inspectors, they don't want to be reading all night. They want to know you understand the law.
Because there's page limits too for like your application, right? So you have to kind of like work within that scope, but then what you actually end up applying can kind of be like, a larger draft of that, getting the point A to point B, which brings me to my question about like, what are just some common mistakes folks may make when it comes to submitting their SOPs?
So some things that people make mistakes with is, one, being too detailed. One of the things that it's good, we do press that you need to be detailed as far as aligning with the actual regulation. So stating that 4 years, stating the I'm going to double check IDs coming in, or stating that we have that steel mesh that they want in the walls, whatever it may be. But being too detailed. So one of the things, mock recalls are part of the SOPs. If you say I'm going to do a mock recall on September 3rd every year, you better do it on September 3rd every year. There is no variance. Now, if you say I'm going to do it periodically or annually, you give yourself, well, I'm going to do it at some point within a year. I'm not tied to a specific date or a specific time frame. So therefore, things happen in life. We try our hardest to hit deadlines, but things happen. And this gives you a little bit more leeway to say, if I miss that September 3rd, it's okay. I can do it September 5th or, September 1st, whatever works for your schedule. So being too specific can sometimes be harmful, because if you didn't do it in that specific time frame or that specific way that you said in the SOP, that can count against you in the eyes of the inspector. Being too not including, and then on the other side of the detailed part, not including everything in every SOP. So when you're shortening it for your staff or internal reading, you absolutely can reference other sections. However, one of the things that we even learned the hard way was, if I reference a section, it doesn't mean that the person reading that section has the other section. So I learned this the hard way even before getting into cannabis, of I can't reference one section. I have to make sure that section is a part of that submission. And it is because they do split reading. Legal is going to look at one side, their finance person is going to look at another. In the CRC, they have different departments, and that department, they're only going to look at what applies to them. So if they don't have the whole package, it's going to come back to you, and it's going to be back and forth and back and forth. Save yourself the time and put everything together in each section. And this is solely just for the inspectors, because they may not have all the needed information, and that's problematic for you.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, because a lot of your application is really just regurgitating what the notice of application says, right? What the CRC rules and regulations say. All you're really saying is like, okay, I understand this. Here's how I plan to meet regulation NJ.12345678910.
Exactly.
Right?
And that brings up a great point, Precious, is making sure that you put those regulation numbers in there. By not citing the regulation, now they're reading the whole thing. Sometimes an inspector can say, hey, you cited the regulation. I know you're paying attention to detail. I know that you have the information. And so it's helpful for them to say, hey, okay, I know you're paying attention. Maybe I don't have to read as deeply as I need to, but if you're not citing the regulation, now they're, okay, where did you get this information from? So it does help to put those NJAC 1730, start putting all the numbers behind it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Just like, even from my experience, I just encourage all students to really get to know the regs, because it does come to you really quickly. Feels like a lot, like a thick book of rules, but I think it's just like the best way to understand your business. Like cannabis actually teaches you, especially if this is your first time operating the cannabis business, you will learn a lot from like your initial stages of business building. That's where you'll get all of that information to be a solid operator like Monica later on. So moving along, because I want to get into like actually writing those SOPs and putting them together. I mean, for people who, again, just started, is this something that could be templatized? Can we find templates for this? Or do we have to really go step one, I open the door. Step two, I make a left. Like, what is the best way for someone to really put pen to paper for the SOPs? And are there resources out there for it?
There are definitely resources out there. And the way I look at it, when it comes to resources, it comes to, first of all, your own experience in the cannabis industry. The first time I ever did a round of SOPs with somebody, I definitely used a template because it was my first time and it was very helpful to have a starting point. And there are guidelines out there. Even a lot of the POS systems for people who are in retail, FlowHub, Dutchie, they have just blank SOPs. So you can start from there. As far as manufacturing, there are organizations out there, the ISMP, I always forget the acronyms, they have them out there. Part of our SOPs too, or your business manual actually includes your emergency procedures. There's SOPs out there and like the Red Cross for those. So there's a lot of guidelines. But for those who have very specific, for people who've been in the industry and are saying no, it has to be this way, my way, and no other way, you might not want to use those templates. And why I say that is, even as an operator now, I have managers, I have retail people coming from other dispensaries, coming from other markets, not even from New Jersey. We had somebody who moved back to New Jersey from Las Vegas. Well, they do it very differently there. So I want to make sure that they're doing it the way that I want to see in our store. We are very education and customer service forward. So I want them to interact with our customers that way. Then I want to put that in our SOPs of how they should be greeting, what they should be doing as far as intake, if we want things organized a certain way. If we don't put them out there to the way that we specify, they're going to go based off what they know from before. Well, I used to do this with this company. I used to do that with that company. You don't want them to say to do that. So templates are nice as a starting point. They really are, but they are not your final. Don't just generically send that. You need to make sure that things are exactly how you want them to run for you. I am a stickler with alphabetizing our vault. Our vault I looks very OCD to a lot of people, but it makes me feel a little bit calmer about the product and the compliance. We know where everything is. Somebody comes in, there's no questions. So I want things done that way, that there's that alphabetized, in our vault. And you'll want that too with your own supplies, whether that's chemicals, that people aren't putting things where they shouldn't, where quarantine items are away from other items. So you do need to take more time than just a blanket template. You want to make sure that that template then molds to exactly how you want things to operate. And again, in line with the law.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to add all the citations in there. You're going to have to change verbiage as far as time frame, as far as security measures, as far as who that actual person is, because there is a very big difference too from a small structure to a large. Some of those SOPs are going to list like 20 people. And if you're a micro business, you have 5, 10 max. So let's be real about what the capacity of people is. So again, templates are a good start point, but it's just the start point.
I think that's the beauty of SOPs. It truly tells you as an operator how to operate. Like, yes, you put it out there, but even you, if you forget, like, okay, what is my process for a recall? You can go there, implement it, and see actually how it works. Just something that popped into my head because we mentioned it early, because we know the CRC has its mandates for the SOPs and how to submit them. Does that change dependent on municipalities? Do municipalities ask for some different things with SOPs potentially? Like I know you mentioned with the security part, some municipalities ask for armed guards, some don't. When are you making those changes? Are you having 2 separate SOPs? And then like, which one is the one are you following?
So a lot of times that first submission of SOP to the CRC, where maybe you're converting from conditional to annual, you're mostly focused just on the CRC. It's that final submission where you're ready to go operational that it really should just be one SOP incorporating everything. Because as you're converting to operation, you're also starting to think about what platforms you're using and how they integrate into the workflow. You know, you might have had an idea when you started out from your conversion to annual, but let's be real, the cannabis industry changes on a dime and we need to adapt with it. So a lot of times your SOPs will progress, and that's why they ask for a second one. Again, as you're going into operation, you'll need to submit that for review. And so that's a lot of times where you finalize things. At that point, you're done with it with the municipality. You have what you need to know, what you need to do with them. We didn't have to submit a final draft of the SOPs. Instead, it was that application to the municipality. And so we just made sure that what we had promised in the municipality as far as security concerns, as far as hours, right? Like we have to put in there for our hours, all those things that they moved over into the SOP submitted to CRC so that we had one uniform way of doing things for just across the board.
I want to go to a question we have here in the Q&A box. It's actually a really great question from Colin. Shout out to you. With how many SOPs are required by New Jersey for the conditional license, what strategies would you or for the full licensing, what strategies would you recommend for managing and updating them effectively and timely for compliance? So I actually did want to talk about like updating in general too. So I would add on and say, just when are you updating SOPs, even like post-operational? What would cause an update of an SOP?
So first part of the question, I think, was about how many SOPs for conditional license. And I believe that one was only 6, if I remember, because you didn't have to do delivery. You didn't have to do, and this is again from a retailer's perspective, I believe it was less than the 10.
For the conditional license, you only had to submit your business plan, and there was one more, a compliance plan, your business plan, compliance plan along with the application. And then when you converted, then you had to have all of that. So conditional, you didn't have to have everything, but either way, you have to submit all your SOPs. So it makes sense to like have it prepared no matter what.
Exactly. But yeah, meant conversion. Apologies. Okay, so Colin, Colin, you did mean. Sorry, I'm reading through here. So yes, that really is just that conversion factor there. In the conversion factor, it was the 10, and then you have to be more specific in your final operational SOPs. So you are still doing the same amount of SOPs from conversion, and then updating them to be more detailed as you go to operational for that final inspection. Because the one for conversion from conditional to annual, it is still those 10, but you can be just, I hate to say regurgitate the regulations, but they're only looking for about 250 words. So it's really hard to write down a whole SOP. You're really just regurgitating the regulations and showing and understanding that you can fulfill that. Then when you go to actual move to operation, that's when you're going to get the fully fledged one that's going to be a little bit more detailed step-by-step guideline from point A to point B. As far as updating them, there's a few ways that you can do that. So the way that we've kind of found to be the easiest is, again, Precious had mentioned and kind of talked about the difference of SOPs for compliance versus operational. So we submitted the ones for compliance, and then as we've been going along in this first year, we've been putting out more detailed instructions for actual operational. And again, based off software, because software updates. So every time there's a software update, I have to update those, the operational ones. However, the compliance ones, generally about 3 to 4 months out from our renewal is when I'll start to give the full-fledged, rather than just addendum. I'll actually go back and rewrite about 3 to 4 months out from that renewal of the license. So I kind of look at it as you're updating periodically as there's updates to procedures internally and just addendum, but a full-fledged renew of the actual SOPs doing a few months before so that you have time to review with all stakeholders that the newly fully fledged SOPs make sense.
And with that, when you're mentioning all stakeholders, like that's like training your staff and getting them to jump on board with any changes, just so like they're not doing an old procedure, they can follow in on what is currently happening.
And it may be changing too based on your structure. If you started out with 10 employees and now you've grown so much that you have 50, I hope that happens for everybody. You've got a lot of changes to make.
Yeah.
It could be the other way too. You started out with 50 and now you got 5. You got to update those SOPs based off the structure. Or maybe you are a micro who went to a full license. Again, you're updating based on structure and status. But I look at it more as those compliance SOPs I add addendums to, but I don't fully change until about 3 months before. And again, once that 3 months, it's starting to talk to everybody who's doing those roles. Are these still aligned with what we're doing? What do we need to bring in from the changes, and what are we still missing from changes? I hope that's
Yeah, and
helpful.
I think that's super helpful. And this part, I'm actually super interested in your answer because we are in the world of AI, right? AI is here, it's not leaving. So this is a great question. Do you believe AI or chat GPT can be a useful option in creating and updating SOPs, especially to save money for those who may not be able to hire a technical writer? And I will say, like, there are some people that charge a pretty penny to write out your SOPs for you. I am of the belief that students, this is something you can do yourself and want to do yourself, but there are consultants that, that take on that task for you. So yeah, how does AI can it play a part in SOPs? Will regulators know this is AI written, and like, what are your thoughts there?
So I wouldn't use AI as the create my SOPs and see what happens. I'd go in with and say, this is what I want to say. I want to get to the point of you gotta give them a little bit. But I do find it helpful. I'm a pharmacist by trade, which means I am not a wordsmith. My language is like, let's talk sulfites, not like glorious legalese. So I won't lie, I actually use ChatGPT to fluff up my language to make it seem more compliant. And so if I say like, here's the directions, and put in something about like manufacturing, or put in something about retail steps and standards, it will help with the language to adjust. But I wouldn't make that your sole, like, hey, ChatGPT, put an SOP in for a dispensary. It's not going to be compliant at all.
Yeah.
And it's going to get turned right back to you. So at least give it some of that what's needed. But I don't lie, I use it for some flair language, because that's just not me. I'm not legalese. And I do have my legal team look over it. We have a lawyer on our team. I think everybody has some kind of legal counsel. I would hope that you would. And if they're a partner, it makes it easier. But having just somebody look over it who at least understands some kind of legal background is helpful. I mean, you have us here as instructors that can look and say, you might need a little bit more guidance on it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with ChatGPT as long as you're just using it for language and not necessarily to be compliant.
Not the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah.
That should be just around the board for everybody. So also in your courses, you actually dive into, and I'm looking here, 2 specific topics, which I think are actually really good to touch on for this course: adverse events and QA/QC, meaning quality assurance and quality control. Let's talk about adverse events. What is an adverse event? And I want to get a little personal story for you. Have you experienced any adverse events or heard of any adverse events that,
Oh,
like,
Lord, have we?
situation you have to refer back to the SOP to figure out what that looked like?
Yes, many a times. So as far as adverse events go, New Jersey is very specific, and they do detail it as like a health event, right? Like it has to actually include something health wise that was either unexpected, not they weren't prepared for, and unpleasant, really. So that's like how New Jersey sees it. But it does have to be health related. So that means it could be a skin rash. It could be as deep as an infection like aspergillus, or it could be a burn. That has happened before, some kind of burn because of touching the battery when it was overheated. So any kind of thing where there's actual health related event that's going to be there. As far as for health related events and having to go back to the SOPs, yes, we have had a few of those. And I don't mean to say like there's been so many, but you do remember when there's an adverse event. I had a very, very interesting one, to say the least, in Pennsylvania, when I was working as a pharmacist in a dispensary, and a gentleman had called to talk to our bud tender and said, the product gave me a seizure. Yeah, talk about freak out moment from a bud tender. And they're like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And so I happened to be in a consult. So the floor manager went back to the SOPs and like, we need to consult the pharmacist. So in there it was consult the pharmacist on duty if an adverse event. So they knew okay, you're coming out of they pulled me out of my consult with a patient. This is what happened. And we were lucky enough again that we had pharmacists on duty, so I could do a medical consult then. But it basically was like, if the pharmacist isn't there, you got to have them call to a medical professional. Like, this isn't, we don't wait for something like that to happen, right? Anything smaller could have stayed in house, and we could have navigated through that way. But since we had a medical professional in house, me, unfortunately, I don't mean to say unfortunately, but I was a little thrown off guard. I did get to consult with him, and it actually turned out it was nothing to do with the product. After talking to him, the patient had stopped his seizure medications and tried to replace with cannabis. And I was like, whoa, 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 you can't just stop your medicine, dude. Like, you got to keep taking it. Otherwise the seizure's going to happen. And I was like, you need to call your neurologist. You need to get back on the schedule with your medications, and call me in like 2 weeks and just tell me you're okay. But that step was in there, that you needed to consult a medical professional in our SOPs. Like, we can handle in-house things that aren't life-threatening. We can guide them and direct them. Okay, we're going to pass this along. But anything that became life-threatening, it went immediately to a medical professional. So we had that step in there, which was extremely helpful. Other guidance was, so we had another one where a person, and I shouldn't say we, this was another dispensary in Pennsylvania, had an issue with a person who actually had a reaction, a skin reaction. And so they documented and notified the manufacturer, because it was in the SOPs. Okay, person claimed that they had a skin reaction from it. Well, then a second person at another dispensary had it, and a third person at their dispensary. They started to see a repeat, and it turned out that there was an inactive ingredient in it that had spoiled. And it was causing this like reaction on people's skins. Certain people were a little bit more sensitive, but they had realized that, oh, that was not supposed to be put in there. So they had to do a recall. Very simple.
Recall, which then would lead to your recall SOP.
Exactly. But they did the right thing in who they had to notify. They notified the manufacturer. And then, so that way, if anybody else notified, again, because the second person who claimed it wasn't even at that dispensary, it was a different one, it still made it back to the right place so that they could react before it got worse, before anything actually, life-threatening could have happened.
And with all of what the adverse events, did you have to report it? I know you document it, keep it in house. Do you have to report that back to your commission or any higher ups, or it's just like if they come in and checked during an audit is something you have to mention?
So depending on the state, like I said, that example was in Pennsylvania, and everything went directly to Pennsylvania was go to the grower, who then reported it higher, where in New Jersey, they actually require that whoever finds out has to be reporting as well to the CRC. So what's interesting, and I think very smart of the CRC, is that they require anybody who, if a person complains to us, we have to notify of an adverse event. We find it's an adverse event. And after we do our investigation, we notify not only the grower, but the CRC. Then the grower notifies the CRC. Basically, it just reinforces that we need to just constantly, somebody's checking with the CRC to let them know if something really is going to end up being a recall. Yeah. We're already ahead of it then.
It really helps our students on here, because there is that issue throughout the industry where things happen and it could affect people. This is a live plant. People react differently. A lot of people don't really even know the endocannabinoid system. There's first time users, for cannabis products. So I also just, recommend as much education you can incorporate in your operations. I think that can also feed your SOPs to like write out smart instructions, write out smart work instructions. Cause literally we've seen and heard it all, like, especially on the security side of SOPs. What do you do when a car drives 50 miles per hour straight through your windows? Like, I don't think you're going to have enough time to pull out the book and go read the manual. So again, just my pure belief that SOPs teach you actually what your business needs. All right, now let's switch over to talk to quality assurance and quality control. Can you just describe those definitions for us?
Yes. So quality assurance, quality control, God, with me. There's your back. Okay. So the quality control, those are the steps in place that we're going to make sure that we're doing to prevent anything from happening, right? We're going to control what is coming out of our facility. And the assurance are those checks and balances, even afterwards, even after that product's made. So we have to look them as they work hand in hand, but they are two separate approaches, right? One is going to be proactive and one is going to be reactive. The proactive being, I'm going to make sure that we wipe everything down, all the stainless steel equipment. If we're manufacturing, we're going to make sure we're using the right agents so that nothing is contaminated going out, that everything is sterile. It could be even in being proactive in your dispensaries as far as labeling and making sure that products are labeled appropriately so the person's getting the right product, making sure that the right paperwork is going out with there. There are some directions that you may want going out, or there are requirements from the state as far as like what kind of labeling has to be on electronic devices, and what kind of guidance has to be there. So those are again being proactive. The reactive is again just making sure like, hey, who's that phone number that they're going to call if something goes wrong? Who's going to answer it? I'm going to take this batch and I'm going to test it just blindly and see how that compares to what the report says. Or I'm going to maybe even doing customer service calls and seeing how that quality of service was. So again, just making sure that that people have a way to get back to you if things are going wrong, or that you might catch them before they actually even get out to the public.
So would you say like QA/QC really lives more on the manufacturing cultivation side, or is it also applied to the retail side as well?
I think it applies to all sides. I mean, when we're looking at the end of the day, what you're putting out there, quality of service is just as important as quality of product. And so if that quality of service isn't there, I mean, that to me that's where I look at our quality control and our quality assurance. And it is too, even on, I look at the dispensary side as what am I putting on my website? Is it accurate to what the person's expecting? Because if I put that that's 1 milligram of THC and there's 10 in there, that person is going to go off the website. They're going to be a little surprised. So I look at it as, yeah, that there's definitely quality checks that are needed within the dispensary just as much as they're needed in manufacturing and cultivation and lab testing.
Yeah, no, I think having like QA/QC checklists, I found like super helpful when I'm doing my work or building my business. It just helps me refer to, okay, is this product ready to, is it meeting the standard that you set for yourself for whatever you are looking to accomplish? So I love checklists. I implement them every single, I feel like to kind of like operate in cannabis, you just need to have a list consistently that you're looking through to maintain product, because you'll get different test results sometimes from labs. You'll get different products even if it's coming from the same manufacturer, and you always have to kind of review and make sure that for what you're telling your patients and or consumers that this is the product, you are like triple confirming that it is based on what you receive.
And I
um,
think you make a good point with the checklists and whatnot. There's part of that quality control and assurance is training. I mean,
mhm.
it really does come down to not only just like having these steps, having these checklists, but making sure people know how to utilize them, and know what they are supposed to be looking for as far as any kind of errors or issues. Like if you see that this is wrong, don't just keep going. Stop,
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah. Stop it immediately. So I I want to talk about like the team, right? Because as owner operator, yeah, you know all these things. Like you're the one that's building this, putting it together. But a lot of our students here have indicated that they want to be owner operators. So you're going to be in charge of training your team, training your staff, putting that together. What is that process of getting folks to really understand the SOPs? And how often are you doing like, monthly trainings, quarterly trainings? Like really, how do you incorporate your staff into making sure that your SOPs are successful?
So far I found that quarterly trainings, depending on, like
Hmm.
certain things you don't need to, you're going to find that everybody has an understanding of very simple tasks, but the broader picture of tasks or inventory team tasks, or might be your the people managing your soil, like I recommend quarterly. And why I say that has to do a lot with how you're training. So one of the things I realize is I may start training and I do a lot of like classroom, like here's the steps we're going to go over. Okay, now let's do a hands-on practice. I may find that a couple months down the road, if I have new staff or some older staff that needs, staff that's been with us that still needs retraining, I have to change my technique because how maybe I explained it that first time isn't working for them. And what I mean by that too, digitally, I had okay, we're going to try some digital training, see how that works. And I had staff who was like, I'm just not connecting with the computer. Okay, so now let's do this more in person, one-on-one. So I do assess our trainings quarterly just to make sure that the people who are being trained are actually retaining that information in the way that works for them. And I mean, to say that there's not a generational gap, there definitely is. I realize
Yeah.
that I'm not that old, but like, I'm like, wow, okay, I say certain things and certain words and I get just
Yeah.
befuddled looks from my staff of what was that word you used? And I'm like, Okay, let's take a step back now.
Take it
So
through.
I actually do quarterly just to assess that how I'm training works for them, and if it doesn't, then maybe we need another resource um, to really kind of hit that message home.
I think everything we talked about today is like super critical, right? I know a lot of our students may have not made it all the way to level 9. You know, it's a lot of content going through CTA, but level 9 really is like where you get into that thick of what your application is going to need, depending on your license type. I have one more question. How do SOPs truly differ depending on license type? I know cultivation, manufacturing, retail, delivery, wholesale, distribution, your SOPs are going to look different, right? Are there some that kind of like cross over? There are folks who are going after multiple licenses. So like, could some SOPs work for other things, or are there parts where like they're just completely separate from one another?
I think it's really going to come down to, if you're going after multiple licenses, are you looking at the same facilities and are they in the same municipality? If they're in the same facilities, security can be a little bit overlap there, right? Like you may have a quarantine that works for both your bulk and your sales. Like if you're doing growing and manufacturing, to have that one quarantine area that both utilize, that's, you're gonna have some overlap there. Delivery, obviously, if you're growing and manufacturing, again, you can have the same storage. Same thing if you're retail and you're doing delivery, like you're generally going to have the same vault. You're not going to create a separate second vault for delivery out of your facility. You just use the same vault. So a lot of those can overlap. But then when it comes down to actual processes and procedures for manufacturers and how they're doing step by step, that's obviously going to change and be very different than what it would be for like a sales. But it really does, I think, have to come down more to your facility than it necessarily has to come down to the task at hand. The task at hand is always going to be about that specific task. But if your facility overlaps, you can actually use a lot of the same language.
I
And
think
even
that's,
for like
yeah,
adverse reporting, if you're a bigger company, you have one compliance manager, it's all going to lead back up to that person. But if you're a smaller company, you're generally keeping it in house to
yeah.
you. That's really what it comes down to, you as the owner.
Especially for folks that are like retail and delivery, or like doing delivery with retail, or folks that are co-housing their cultivation and manufacturers, which we know a lot of the larger companies do, but we're seeing some of our independents come up in that way. And even like I'm noticing how, because me even working with the cultivation and manufacturing, like they have different rules, even expiration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rules are different for like infused pre-rolls versus regular pre-rolls. Like they have different shelf life. So you have to like refer back to two separate things, but there's one house underneath it. So things
Yeah.
get really specific. I just encourage students to like, be extremely detailed when you're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about your business, your operations, how you're putting it on paper, and truly just like what makes sense, right? What makes sense, and currently what's being done, and maybe how you kind of like increase efficiencies. A lot of our instructors have done these things, so our hope is that you're taking these courses and finding ways to implement just that, or finding ways that you're increasing efficiency and increasing your business. Monica, I'm so thankful for the time you spent with us breaking this down.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a great webinar for those who missed it today. But one question that I do ask every instructor before we leave is, what are the advantages of taking your course?
Advantage of taking my course. um, we actually, one of the things I think that, I'm not even going to say just my course, but I think that the CTA did a great job was making sure that we put real world examples in there. So actually throughout the courses where we go through the SOPs, putting real world examples so you understand what is specifically needed, why it's needed, and to really like focus on that. Also, I think what's helpful in there is, as you're going through the SOPs with me, I do help with verbiage. So there are suggestions on verbiage or suggestions on those words, like periodically and as as seen fit. Things that are able to show that are going to be compliant, but don't hold you to hold your hand to the fire. Like there's things in there that, again, just help with those kinds of thoughts, and thoughts too, maybe on, like I said in the beginning of this, and I say in the lectures, about who also you need to be in compliance with outside the CRC, Department of Labor regulations, and what needs to be in your handbook legally in the state of New Jersey. Also, there's suggestions in there for insurance companies and what they're required. Like all of our SOPs say 5 years because the insurance company requires 5-year record company, and legally your employee documents 7 years. So making sure that that verbiage is there to cover us in case we need to have some issues with insurance or in case there's some labor issues, that we show that we're compliant on those. So I think it is helpful, and I think that the CTA did great guidance, and hopefully I gave some good insight there too about some specific language and just scenarios where maybe we're not quite thinking when we're putting these SOPs together.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I mean, truly the devil's in the details. And when we built the CTA, it was to kind of like really span that out. We knew the industry launch, everybody was bright-eyed and excited. We're just going to run head first, even if we're running our head through 10 brick walls to get these businesses open. But there's a lot of nuance that we see people struggle with, and instructors like you coming in and lending your knowledge and expertise is literally invaluable. Like, people don't know, these are like real life consulting hours that you would need to add a budget line to it to get it done. So again, Monica, we're just super thankful. Folks know where to find you on our CTA portal and on our LinkedIn. To everybody who joined, thank you so much. Again, we are starting our Friday sessions on this Friday, actually. So if you guys are interested, if you're a student, you can join. We'll have our camera on. We'll be able to sesh and talk about just what you have going on, answer any questions you may have about the CTA or your application. So please join us for that on Friday. And then the next Tuesday, we are having our level 3 webinar. We start again. This time it's going to be a lot more interactive. We'll be able to talk specifically about questions you have about what you have going on with your application. So we're excited to get into that. So stick around with us. Again, thank you everybody for joining us on a Tuesday. Happy spring. Okay, if you're in Jersey, weather is finally breaking. Fingers crossed it remains that way. Nonetheless, everybody have a great Tuesday night, and we'll see you again for the CTA webinars. Bye.